The European Union is one of the greatest achievements of modern politics. It has almost 450 million citizens and a GDP of 16 trillion euros. If the EU were a country, it would be the third largest in the world by both metrics. Good evening, my name is Maia Mazurkiewicz and welcome to the Anatomy of Disinformation. The European Union's power lies in its unity, but disinformation and influence operations are attempting to undermine that unity, erode trust, and stoke chaos and polarization. It seems Europe's leaders have forgotten that times have changed, and communication is now more important than ever. A lesson in combating disinformation is long overdue. Our guest today is a European at heart and has been responsible for promoting the European way of life at the EU level. We'll talk to him about how the European Union is building resilience, not just against disinformation, but also for a stronger, more united society. I hope this conversation will be about the challenges, but also about strengths and values that bind Europe together.
Margaritis, Schinas, former European Commission Vice President for promoting our European way of life. He is a Greek politician and former senior EU official responsible for migration, security union, social rights, education, culture, youth, health, interfaith dialogue, and the fight against anti-Semitism. He began his European Commission career in 1990, later serving as member of the European Parliament and as the Commission's chief spokesperson. Mr. Schinas held senior roles including Deputy Head of the Bureau of European Policy Advisors, Resident Director of the Commission's Athens office, and Deputy Director General for Communication.
Margaritis, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today, straight from Athens. We're going to be discussing
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. And we're going to be discussing issue of the European Union. And you've been working for so long at the European way of life. So what actually is the European way of life?
The European way of life is the fact that we are 27 democracies, where the rights of the minorities are protected under constitutional guarantees, where we're the world champions of human rights, data protection, where the place of woman is safeguarded in the family, in society, in the workplace, where we have universal systems for education and health free for all, where we take care of our elderly, and where there is no death penalty. This is the European way of life. This is why everybody envies us around the world.
And that's beautiful. How easy is actually to bring this into the communication? And do you think that people believe that, or is it still undermined?
Well, I think this is an issue that you rightly pointing out, is that the European way of life, it's something that we feel, that we are proud of, that we cherish, but it's not something that we're always willing to defend. And this is a problem. This is an issue. It is at the moment where this model of society that we stand for, our successes, our achievements, are being challenged or attacked. This is probably the moment where we also need to strike back. And I don't reveal any secrets when I tell you that we are living such a moment now.
So what you've been doing within the European Commission to protect this way of life?
Well, we are facing two sets of enemies, if you like. First, the external ones, despotic, autocratic leaders and regimes that clearly are afraid of our success because they see that the European democracy and the European model is actually a threat for them. And they very conveniently organize hybrid attacks, disinformation campaigns to discredit everything that we manage to succeed. And then we have also the internal enemies.
And with the external one, you're talking mostly about Russia here, or are you also seeing some other actors?
I think that I talk both about state factors like Russia, and not only Russia, But on the external side, I also see a potential for many industrial actors, many oligarch interests that coalesce around these campaigns, sometimes aligning themselves to state actors, sometimes acting individually.
And then we are coming back to the internal ones. What are them, and if they are having the same goals as the external ones?
The internal ones are equally dangerous because they want to undermine our system from within. These are the so-called populists and nationalist narratives that try to exploit every potential difficulty around us to create a story that Europe is not able to produce good policy or solutions, and that only they can produce miracle solutions to the benefit of the people by closing borders, going national, rejecting any kind of international or European partnership. These are the people who work through our political systems and are equally dangerous as the external ones.
And can you give any examples on this, either on the countries or, again, organizations, or perhaps some narratives as well that they are using in these terms?
On the external enemies, I think the best possible examples are also examples that are known to Poland and I had to deal with as a commissioner, which was a textbook example, was the hybrid attack through migration via Belarus against Poland, Lithuania, Latvia. This was a textbook new generation hybrid attack where our enemies instrumentalize or rather weaponize migration to attack us. And on the internal side, I think the textbook case is again related to migration and the fact that somehow there is a conspiracy to sort of change the fabric of our society and recurring to isolationist and racist attitudes that are better placed to guarantee the purity of society. We have seen this many times. So we have textbook examples on both sides.
And the migration is indeed the issue that is most polarizing currently in Europe, also in the countries that are holding elections or been recently holding the elections. And it's been visible mostly in our part of Europe, I would say, since 2015. But Greece was also alarming about the issue of migration far before. Have you seen as well some influence operations targeting Greece about that?
Absolutely. I agree on your diagnosis that migration continues to be a cleavage, conflicting issue. But I must also say that both in Central Eastern Europe and in the Mediterranean, things are getting better. We have now better control of migratory flows. We have a major European agreement, the new EU Pact for Migration and Asylum, that puts order on our borders. We have more responsibility, we have more solidarity, and we're better prepared to cope with any kind of migration challenge. That's why when we are being attacked over migration, I think for the first time, we have also ourselves many good things to say, to respond to this nihilistic challenge that migration is bad and somehow there is a conspiracy against the people through migration.
So how to get back the narrative around the issue?
Well, I firmly believe that when we discuss fight against disinformation and fake news, hybrid attacks and campaign, the solution is never simple. It's not unidimensional. There's no single bullet about that. We always have to act at different levels of response. The first, of course, is the regulatory level, the legislative side. And there we have also very meaningful legislative and regulatory tools in the digital policy world that for the first time allow Europe to strike back. We have dedicated teams to detect, deter, and respond to online threats. We have very effective cyber security coordination and legislation. We have a dedicated EU agency based here in Athens, ENISA, that does an excellent job. But we need to do more. And we need to do more working through the press, through the owners of the press outlets, through the journalists that are in the front line of the information, and also through the public space, politicians, civil society, trade unions. All these elements have to come into play to respond.
We will go back to our conversation in just a moment, but first, let's analyze the different techniques Russia has been using as part of its Doppelgänger disinformation campaign to distort elections in Europe, especially in Poland, Romania, and Germany.
The Doppelganger operation is one of the most, let's say, infamous operations that is led by the Russian Federation and is attributed to it. It mostly focuses on mimicking real, authentic outlets, media outlets, into sort of a very manipulated version of them on different domains in order to kind of fool and propagate their own narratives across the EU and worldwide as well. In Poland, the operation distributed nearly 300 disinformation tweets targeted at disrupting the discourse around the Polish elections. So the narratives utilized were not random and were strategically designed to attack the EU and discredit Ukraine, undermine Poland's democratic legitimacy, and generally aim to exploit social tensions in order to spread this disinformation and ultimately interfere in Poland's presidential elections. The shares are in the hundreds of thousands. It's 256,000 shares altogether for these posts, which is not a negligible number. And we've also seen that those accounts have evolved to fabricate people. Germany, which has also experienced a lot of similar digital attacks. Specifically, we've seen a lot of Storm 1516 campaign activity, which is Russian-linked actors that launch a series of deepfakes and false narratives about German politicians. And according to Germany's intelligence service, this operation was not only more advanced than the previous efforts, but also more embedded in the German language digital ecosystems as they're learning to lure in local influencers. I believe that Romania presents a striking example of sort of a country having to annul previous presidential votes due to suspected Russian interference. In the current race with the hard right candidate with strong anti-EU and anti-Ukraine messaging are benefiting strongly from suspicious social media activity. With platforms like TikTok and Telegram, investigations show that nearly 1/4 of Romanian language Telegram messages come from Kremlin-backed sources, or have been sourced from Kremlin-backed sources. And across all these countries, the pattern remains clear, with the objective is to exploit the existing frustrations. So this is unfortunately a strategic intent that is not only here merely to influence the vote, but also to erode the general faith in democratic processes across Europe, and with elections scheduled across many EU countries in the coming months.
Do you think there's a broader and larger scale strategy behind Doppelganger in Europe?
Well, clearly this is, again, a pattern that is not surprising. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, there is a parallel battlefield which is developing not on the physical classical warfare, but around the intelligence and the disinformation battlefield. I think that our intelligence agencies are now better prepared. They communicate better among themselves. And I think that these attacks, like Doppelganger, are attacks that are very targeted on a specific geographical area to deter and undo the European support to Ukraine. So we have to be very vigilant, we have to be aware, and most importantly, Maya, I think that we have to strike back. We have to be able to defend, to come out and talk. Do not become, a punching box sack. We have to go back and ask, and why, wonder why, explain why. This is what we need to do.
So how we can exactly strike back? Is strategic communication an option?
Yes, I think we need within our systems, if you allow me to use the term, the forces of good, we need to have a better understanding of what we are facing. We need to have fast exchange of information and communication, and we need to have coordination either via Brussels, EU or NATO, but also bilaterally between the intelligence and information agencies involved. We need to have coordinated responses. We've done that successfully during the pandemic, where we had to face similar attacks of conspirational nature with the vaccines. And this, I think, is a good basis for cooperation to use and apply in this kind of strategic communication efforts that are necessary.
And disinformation and influence operations are changing the attitudes of people, not only during the elections, but in general. Do you think there's enough knowledge about it? And if there is a moment that high-level officials and key opinion leaders are aware of it and really ready to fight back?
Yes, I think that we are now getting at a point where there is awareness. And together with awareness goes remedial action. We also have some successes ourselves, and I think it's useful to underline that in the two last European elections, may I remind your viewers that the European elections is the second biggest electoral process in the planet after the Indian election. We had a remarkable degree of success in deflecting any sort of disinformation campaigns that attempted to convince Europeans not to vote, that wanted to discredit the essence of European democracy. It didn't work. We had record participation in these two elections. We had no major problems. So we need to continue this model of good cooperation, and we need our member states, our capitals, to understand that they have to work together, because any attack against the EU is also an attack on them. They are common shareholders of this project called European Union.
And as you said, that's a positive example, but at the same time, actually the same year that EU elections been held, we faced the issue in Romania of huge attacks on the electoral system.
Yes, you rightly pointing out that Romania was a blatant case of electoral interference, coordinated, well-resourced, financed, structured, and executed through TikTok and other troll factories. That's why it was so blatant that the Romanian authorities and the rule of law prevailed. So you are right to point out that the Romania campaign was a very telling example of disinformation, but the same holds about the response. The response of the authorities and the rule of law was equally remarkable and equally important in undoing this attack.
And Greece, I would like to go back to your country of origin, is of the strategic importance in terms of the geopolitics position, not only in terms of the migration that you've said, but it's also the Balkan country. And we've seen what is happening in Balkans, especially in Serbia, how Russia is very much involved in those countries. Do you also see some influence operations targeting those issues in your country?
Certainly. Greece sits at the crossroads, or rather on top of the tectonic geopolitical plates that bring together Western Balkans, Russian influence in the Western Balkans, Turkey, that has not always played clean and European in this area. We have all sorts of interests around migration and smugglers. So there is a meeting point, a potential point of relevance for these attacks. But I think we also, how should I say, we got immunized and galvanized by the very difficult 10 years that we lived in the 2009-2019 period, when we had this major economic crisis that somehow galvanized Greek public opinion around Europe and around the fact that Greece had to stay both in the euro and the eurozone. Facing up to this extreme difficulty also helped the Greeks, I think, to be more suspect, more rational, and fall less victims of any sort of disinformation and fake news campaigns.
And the unity is more important than ever. And I have now a question still around how to fight back. One of the challenges that we also obviously see in terms of disinformation is attention economy. Very often algorithms that are parts of the big platforms. What is the solution and what the European Union can do around those issues?
Well, I'm glad that you raised this point, because clearly algorithms will shape, if not already shaping, the way we live, the way we buy, the way we think, the way we fall in love, and probably the way we vote. That's why algorithms, under no circumstances, should be left in the hands of software engineers. With all the respect that software engineers merit, I think that managing algorithms is not an issue for them. It's an issue for society. And it's an issue for society, democracy, and the rule of law. And that's why we are very proud in Europe, and this is part of the European way of life, that in our legislation for digital governance, the Digital Services Act, we have very, very solid guarantees to prevent that algorithm management escape the democratic control. This is the only way to be able to cope in the future.
And as you said, we need more unity, a more whole of the society approach for good, and making sure that the internet serves the people instead of attacking it. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Maia. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. Now, let's see how data voids are exploited in disinformation campaigns.
Psychological inoculation interventions preemptively strengthen individuals' resistance to disinformation by exposing them to weakened forms of manipulative tactics or false claims paired with refutations. Inspired by medical vaccines, this approach triggers cognitive antibodies that help people recognize and counter disinformation when they encounter it. By combining threat and refutational preemption, inoculation fosters critical thinking and reduces susceptibility to polarizing narratives.
With truth under pressure and democratic values being tested, it's important to remember that the European Union isn't just an institution. It's a community of countries and people. It's a union of values that shows us we are stronger together. That community is being put to the test. Influence operations are trying to undermine its unity. The real power is within us, the people. And we are the target of the ongoing anti-EU disinformation campaign. That's why, till next time, keep calm and think deeply.